issue. And I want to really welcome especially our presenters, John, Andrew, and Terrence, who have traveled all the way from the US as part of the collaboration that we have with the University of Colorado, where this particular project is anchored. IDS is very pleased to have been a partner in the implementation of the 2 waves that were conducted in 11 counties in Kenya in 2025 that generate the data for which the papers or the seminar presentation is based. So on behalf of the Institute is to say that these seminars do happen every other week. But for this month, I think we had one last week and today, so it's quite back to back. But it's because of the availability of our presenters who just started in the country within the week. So they must be navigating a lot, including coming and getting to the field straight away. And they are here with us at the university for us to hear what are the findings of the data from the 2 waves of fieldwork. So thank you very much. I want now to invite the moderator of this session, who will now take over the mantle and run through the program of this afternoon. Thank you very much and feel most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kamau, and to everyone in the room and everyone joining online. My name is Rahma Hassan. My job today would be to encourage you to engage with today's topic. As part of IDS seminars, we will have the presenters first. I'll start by briefly introducing them, and then they'll take us through this work. And everyone is encouraged to listen in, put in your comments, the chat, and then we can have a conversation to just interrogate some of the interesting findings from this topic of food security, trust in local leaders, and aspirations for migration. Results of 2-wave 11 county housing per day in Kenya. Today, as has already been mentioned, we have Terrence McCabe, professor from the Institute for Behavioral Science, University of Colorado. And we have John. I had asked him how to pronounce that name. I will just pass. Professor John Loring from the same university, but then he's a professor of geography and fellow at the Institute of Behavioral Science, and Dr. Andrew Linke from the University of School, Environment, Society, and Sustainability, University of Utah, who is also associate professor. We have a very interesting abstract here, but I would rather not bore the team by reading the abstract and invite our presenters for today. It's the usual split of time and making sure we have the team attentive and making sure we have time for question and answer. We can attempt the first 35-40 marks and then have like an hour to engage and go back to the two presenters for like more discussion. Over to the team. Feel free to share the time and let's see what you have for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Can people online hear me? Hopefully.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can hear. Maybe we can get someone unmuting and letting us know.
Hey, Belongo, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry that you're not here, but you're here in spirit. Yeah, so thank you very much again for IDS for hosting us. We're very pleased to be back in Nairobi. I wanted to also thank the people who have cooperated with us on this project, especially Belongo and his team, the team leaders, the enumerators, and also, of course, we have effect assistants back in Colorado. And I think Posner is online, but should probably make a presence known at some point. Anyway, what we thought we'd do today is to summarize some of the results of our work to date. We have obviously massive amounts of data when you interview 3,000 household heads and you do it twice. And then you complement that with focus groups and now interviews with local chiefs. It's just a massive amount of information. So there's no way we could even begin to summarize all of the information. So what we thought we'd do today is just focus on three aspects of our work. I will start by introducing the project a little bit, the motivations for it, how we designed the work, the surveys, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the results with respect to what people think are major problems and what county government should focus on. And I'll also talk about the results of one question that we have repeated, and it's an experimental question about endorsement by we found some interesting results later. Then Andrew will talk about migration and the aspirations for migrating and the motivation, the factors behind why people want to move. And then when he finishes, Terry will talk about the focus group results and the find some very interesting similarities and significant differences between the focus groups in the different counties. So, so I want to start off by outlining what we're doing. I won't spend much time on this, but basically we want to understand using panel data how a real question that has been around for a long time but not really resolved. That is, to what extent people respond to a changing environment. And we want to also introduce the idea of why we pick it and the empirical reasons for doing it. And as I said, I will talk about point 6 here, the market experiment, and then after we do point 7, and then Terry will talk about point 8. All right, so we'll start off with this. Which is the IPCC's fixed assessment from 2022. And I just draw your attention to the second point here from page 13. It says, violent conflict and separately migration patterns in the near term will be driven by socioeconomic conditions and governance more than by climate change and we say medium conflicts, which is around 75% conflict. That statement is accurate. So today we will talk about those two topics. We'll talk about the socioeconomic conditions and how they change. We'll talk about the migration pattern. We'll talk about support for violence and effectively covered, which has to do with local institutions, both formal and informal. The second point is that compared to other socioeconomic factors, the influence of climate on conflict is assessed as relatively weak. Okay? And that's a high confidence means that the authors of this report are 90% sure that this is true. Okay? So we check that, and you'll see the results that Andrew presents that in fact it's not accurate for the respect for our results. So again, I go back to the graphic that I've used a lot. It comes out from probably most cited, actually certainly the most cited paper on this issue of environmental change and our conflict and violence. With the public in April 2019. And again, I have to admit I was one of the authors of the paper, and so I'm blaming partly for the results here. But just to draw your attention, in terms of what this expert elicitation project found, is that if you look at the factors that motivate conflict on the left, you'll see that climate change.
Saskia, you need to mute.
Thank you. That climate change is third from the bottom in terms of importance. At the top are various socioeconomic and political factors. But if you look at the bars on the right, it shows very clearly that there's a great uncertainty about the effect of climate change because the research at the time the paper was published didn't really have a clear outcome in terms of what the various research projects on the road that. So this is a well-known graphic that kind of looks at the pathways between environmental change and how it might result in violence as an outcome. And you can see I have added the mediators here as local institutions, and I want to kind of focus on this as my part of the project. And that is the role of local leaders in terms of mediating the link between changing environmental and food conditions and the outcome in terms of violence. So what did we do? We in the preparation for the proposal for this project, we agreed we wanted a variety of different kinds of data, not just large and quantitative survey type data, but we wanted also to have qualitative data. And in our case here, you'll see when Terry talks about it from focus. So we're balancing both the quantitative and the qualitative. We also wanted to analyze the connections between environmental change and social outcomes across a variety of context, a variety of, in the case of Kent, a variety of counties. So they vary by ecological conditions, by political institutional forms in various counties, by ethnic group, obviously, and also by livelihoods. So we focus a lot on the key livelihood categories of pastoralists, farmers, and then kind of a mixed category of others. We also wanted to look at changes over time, because if you do a snapshot of, you only get obviously a very limited picture of what's happening in one time period. But if you repeat the survey questions multiple times over multiple years, you have a much more reliable set of data in terms of trying to track how environmental change affects social outcomes. And we also wanted to integrate other kinds of data, data especially as Andrew will show on the environmental change into the household level and focus group information as well. So we picked Kenya, obviously, even though we have a very large sample, we couldn't do it in every county, so we had to decide on the selection of counties. So we picked 11 counties, which are shown and identified on this map. And then we also, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, want to focus on rural households, not Nairobi or other urban households. So we have here 11 counties. You can see a mix of farming and pastoralist counties, and then one is sort of mixed. We have also 376 enumeration area sample points, which are shown in red on this map. And those sample points are randomly selected and then checked to make sure that they're rural, because the Kenya census categorizations of urban and rural is really out of date in many ways because of the expansion of urban areas into rural communities. So we made sure that the selection that we got from the Kenya census was in fact rural. We actually had to change about 25% of the original sample points to ensure that they're all rural. So in these 376 enumeration areas, we sampled 3,008 household heads. We completed it in March of 2025 with Malongo and his many team members. I think there were 55, 60 team leaders and enumerators involved in that project. But at the same time as interviewing household heads, we asked the team leaders to interview the village leaders in the particular meetings and ask them a series of questions. And that I will show some results of that. We repeat for the households by phone this time, not contact, as wave zero is just finished a few weeks ago. The phone interviews for those 3,000 households, and not all of those could be recontacted because of various reasons. But we managed to find about 73% of the original 3,008. And then in parallel with the qualitative work in November, we conducted focus groups in 6 counties. Terry will talk about those 6 counties later. But again, we wanted a set of pastoral and rural and farming counties. And we, as I said, finished that in November. And right now, we are interviewing with chiefs in 3 counties in Chacos, thanks cell phones yesterday, and the day before in the Charters, we go to Meru, and we always seem to end up in ECO, so we go through ECO fast. Anyway, here's the team. Again, many of you recognize yourselves here, hopefully, but wonderful group, dedicated group, just tremendous amount of work, and I can't really thank you enough for your assistance last year, because frankly, without it, this work would never have been completed. So I want to start here with just some results. We have a lot of statistical results. We have a lot of regression variables and coefficients, and I don't want to bore you with those details. Instead, I will show mostly, in my case, very specific results. So as I mentioned, we did 2 surveys at the same time. The household respondents, 3,008 people, and then the village leaders, 379, because a couple were interviewed in the same place. And we had an open question, which I always find very important, which is, what problems do you think the local authority should address? In this case, we asked specifically about county government. And if you look at this graph, you'll see that the highest bar for the respondents is that the economic issues around jobs, unemployment, low wages, those kinds of things. For the village leaders, you'll see the bar for drought and water supply is almost 60%. So basically, almost over half of village leaders mentioned drought and water supply as being something that the county government should focus on. Both agree that infrastructure was an important topic. Other topics were relatively unimportant. But the point here is that water, drought, water supplies, those kinds of issues keep coming up in our interview data as well as in the focus group data. So then, if you break down the problems that the county should address, just looking only now at the household respondents, you'll see there is a significant difference between pasture and farmer. So you see, for example, water supplies. Pasture was more than 75%. Think that is one of the big problems that the county government should address. The farmer ratio is much lower, under 50%. So there are significant livelihood differences that come up here and in many other aspects of our project. They agree on a lot of other things like government services. The ratio is very similar. But on the issue of water, there is a big difference between pastoralist communities in the drier parts of Kenya versus the farming communities. So, okay. I just want to give results of one question that we asked. And so it's an endorsement question. So the idea here, for those who are familiar with endorsement experimental questions, is you divide the sample randomly into 2 groups, the control group and the treatment group. So 72A is the control group and 72B is the treatment group. And then you give them a prompt. And then you add something for everybody. And then for the treatment group, you add a sentence that checks on the endorsement. So you can see here, the prompt is very general, folks. A lot in general about possible conflict over food security. But one response that often recurs is taking the resources of the groups. Do you agree with this and related activities such as raiding and seeding land? So half the sample, 1,500 people got that question. So then they had to strongly agree, either to agree or disagree, or gone all the way to strongly agree. The second part, the treatment part, adds the sentence at the bottom. In some communities, traditional elders encourage using other people's resources. Right? And then again, the same kind of outcome. So the difference between these two is a measure of the endorsement of that group, the regional language in this particular case. So when we look at this, and I'm just going to present the results of 2 waves here. You can see that the disagree and strongly disagree are the brown bars of this graph. So in wave 0, which is last March, right, you can see that 40% and almost 35% vast majority of people in the control group disagreed with taking the resources from groups, right? But if you look at wave one, which is just a couple of weeks ago, you can see there's a big drop in the number of people who disagree with this thing. There's correspondingly an increase in the number of people who agree with it, saying that it's okay. So that's for the control group. We didn't get the endorsement. On the other side is the treatment group. And again, you can see somewhat of a drop. It's not as dramatic. There is a rise, obviously, in the numbers who agree with the statement. But the point is that across the board, there is a general increase in the number of people in the past year that have agreed with this endorsement and with this taking that resources. If we break it down by livelihoods, I'm just showing the control group here, you can see that the on the left are the pastoralists, the middle are the farmers, on the right are the other groups. And in general, the pastoralist groups are more inclined to agree with this statement that it's okay to take the resources of other groups. Farmers have higher ratios of disagreement. But again, as I said, between last year and this year, the number of people who disagree with taking resources of other groups, that number has gone down, which is an important significant development that can say something that we have to really examine and get that right. So I will share this last slide, and I guess I was going to get up to the screen and point to the people in the room, but I'll do it online here. So again, a lower score means more agreement with the state about it's okay to take out groups resources. And again, you can see pastoralists have a lower score than farmers. This is last March. You can see again a significant drop for pastoralists from 3.68 average mean score down to 2.84, and also for farmers from over 4.08 down to 3.56, indicating again this sense that over the past year something changed, that people are more willing to support the taking of other groups' resources. So I will leave it at that point and carry it on to Andrew. I think that's
All right, thanks, Donald, of course, and thanks everybody for taking the time to join us online on person. All right, so I'll shift gears a little bit here as far as the theme goes, and touch on some of the environmental conditions data that we use. All right, the slide advanced. The environmental condition data we use, again, these can be complicated to work with, and I'd love to talk more about it. I'll try to give a general overview. And then there are two survey questions in particular that I want to present to you. Relocation aspirations, title and abstract, and then a question, a pretty clear question, I think, about food security, food insecurity. And specifically how those two sets of responses change between two waves. So as a bit of an overview for this kind of subsection here, we're going to be talking about relocation aspirations and specifically how these questions are asked and what the data are telling us. And then focus on change over time between wave 0 and wave 1, right? So the first part here, number 1, is going to be a bit of work we've already done having to do with responses to the 2025 wave 0 survey. And then especially near the end of my share of this time, we'll talk about how the first one, this wave 0 and wave 1 are related to each other. All right, so to get directly to the point, this question is the key outcome or the response that we're the most interested in investigating here. Forgive me, this line moved around a little on the slides, but the question asks, would you like to relocate your residents in Kenya in the country? And the responses are, including don't knows and conventional refusals, etc. The responses are definitely yes, which to get ahead of myself here, we're coding as 4. Mostly yes as a 3, indicating some aspiration for this mobility response, but not as strong as a 4, of course, and then down the line to a 2 and 1. And you can see the counts for these responses in the right-hand column. So around 300 people said definitely yes, I would like to change my residence. Mostly yes counts in roughly 370, and so on. All right, so the environmental predictors, as John mentioned, but in a slightly different realm here, these environmental data are pretty fine resolution, both in the temporal dimension, but also in spatial resolution. So these are just sort of snapshots to give you a sense of what we're working with, what they tell us. So this particular data set, TAMSAT, gives us rainfall data at a monthly resolution at 4, I'm sorry, these slides are advancing, at 4 kilometer spatial resolution. So on the left, you can see these are really, really quite small pixels, yeah. And the enumeration areas are in the black dots overlaid with the precipitation data. And then on the right, the 20 kilometer soil moisture data. This is a slightly more coarse resolution for data because it measures volumetric content in the soil down to rooting depth of the predominant crops in the area. Anyway, we joined these to the survey responses, right, to get at this question of how environmental mobilities might be related to migration aspirations. For just one example year, these data go back to 1983. But for one example year, we've taken here March, April, and May as a time period in 2024, the year preceding the wave 0 of the survey. Right, and you can see in blue areas, these are places that have had more rainfall on the left or have higher soil moisture content, respectively, on the right. And then with the time series data, we can make a reference. A reference to an historical time period, right? So I already indicated that these go back in time relatively far. There are several different data sets in the mix here with different starting points, and the details we can talk about. But you can see in the top panel A, we have a normalized difference vegetation index, which measures healthier crop with healthier vegetation with higher values and less healthy vegetation in lower values. Then we have a long-term standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index, that's SPEI acronym that you're seeing in panel D, which takes into account temperature and days of sunlight. And then rainfall and soil moisture in C and D, those that I just showed you on the map. One of the key things here is to notice that we distinguish between long range and short range time periods among all of the EAs. And while some, I mean, in the literature generally in studies, might focus on annual trends in the black dotted line, there are considerable differences when you measure these trends in environmental conditions, specifically for not just a season, but in this case, 2 different generally defined seasons that are the most important for both farming and, of course, for livestock. So we have key predictors there in the environmental realm, and then we have key predictors in the social realm. So I'm not going to go through all of these because we don't have the time to do that, but I want to illustrate the very kind of rich set of information here that we have from these surveys that the Belongo team collected. So we have whether or not the respondents are predominantly pastoralists or mainly farmers. We have whether or not they are from a low or a high socioeconomic status household, and then some conventional additional variables here, like whether or not they reported having, my cursor is lost, lower sales revenue here, just quickly for question number 21 in the first survey. Lower sales revenue than they are used to in the household for the crops that they grow in that household, right? Whether or not they receive remittances, for example, and how many or how much the volume of remittances they receive. And then several other questions. So we have a methodological approach ranking how well these variables all predict that mobility aspiration outcome. So how much people said in the first table that I showed you, the first EL, how much they said they wanted to relocate, right? But definitely yes, maybe yes, mostly no, and so on. And when we make these estimations of how much each variable contributes to that response, we found that a lot of the environmental variables, and just to describe them really quickly for a second time here, we have long rain, LR, NDVI, normalized difference vegetation index. This is within a unit change. So this is that graph that we saw of change over time. That one example of an environmental variable is coded yellow, along with the rest of the other environmental variables coded yellow. And the real point here, the take-home message, is that even if you can't read small text on the slide, a lot of those yellow variables stack near the top of the key predictors for whether or not people had said that they were interested in relocating the residents of their household. So to put it really, really plainly in a single sentence, this is one of the conclusions that we'd be really interested to discuss more with everybody online and in the room. And the conclusion is that environmental conditions rank among the highest predictors of aspiring or relocating. 8 of the top 10, in fact, as we've measured them and as we've estimated them. And this is related to the quote that John drew your attention to in the IDCC report about having, that is the authors of that report, what was formerly the medium level confidence of the role of this variable in potentially destabilizing outcomes like mobility. Excuse me, I just flew in last time. Now we're going to move to changes over time, and I'll talk about mobility aspirations, the same question, but now that we've had a bit of a prompt here for familiarity, and then talk about food insecurity. So with the same question that you already saw, what we can do in the first wave after wave 0 is measure how much each person's evaluation of that aspiration, their own personal preference, has changed on that score of 1 to 4, right? So from 1 to 4, in general across the sample, the mean change in the score was actually a reduction of -0.29, right? So fewer people reported that they wanted to relocate in the first wave than they did in wave 0, right? Who within the population is an interesting question that we're going to pursue, but we're also curious about your views about this. So this is just how the data are structured for measuring these changes over time. Just really quickly, you can see this first set of rows here. This is respondents. Let's just call it 0, 6, 5 for the last 3 digits. We have the 2 waves, right? Wave 0 and wave 1. We have their relocation score from 1 to 4, how likely they are to want to relocate. And then we just measure the difference here between the two. So this person reported 1 at wave 0, and they reported 1 at wave 0, which means that their score changed not at all, right? Moving further down the line, one of these respondents here reported that they were quite interested at level 3 in relocating at the first wave 0, and then 1 at the first wave, right? That was just a few weeks ago. So this person has a change of -2. So they were less likely at some point during the year, something happened that made them less likely to want to relocate their house.
Please mute, Alois.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so in a similar way, we can analyze questions about food security. And this question, this is the one I'll finish with here, 1 or 2 slides about this result. We asked in both ways, how many days last month before today did your household have meals where there was not enough food to eat 4 members of your household skipped meals. The distribution was on the last stop toggling, but the mean score change calculated in the same way that you just saw in the data frame, the rows of responses, and also the same way that we calculated the change for the mobility response. We found that more people reported this higher level of food insecurity in the in wave 1 than in wave 0, right? Okay, so what we're doing now, and this is preliminary, but what we're doing now and we're going to continue to do is try to evaluate how well weather changes and variability in precipitation patterns, soil moisture content, and so on, serve as mediators between the 2005 responses and the 2006 responses, right? So the change that you just saw for the 2 different questions, we can estimate as an effect of the same types of precipitation data that I just showed. So this is actually the same map, but what we did is we measured precipitation using the same data set that we originally used for many years before the first survey between the 2 surveys, right? And if we model that as a mediator, this is just the only results slide I have, and I'll finish here. What this is telling us is that the star indicates statistical significance, and that variable, precipitation between the 2 waves, is a predictor of the change that people reported in food insecurity. And so the specific detail here is that as precipitation goes up, people are less likely to report food insecurity. I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to Terry with some slides about the focus group discussions. And I look forward to questions and comments. Thank you very much. In advance, you know this, Terry.
Yeah. Also, I've never used that. Okay.
I'll stay.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. So what we also did was do focus group interviews in 6 different counties. These are the counties we did these in. We tried to divide them according to the way livelihoods are structured in rural areas for pastoralists and for farms. The 2 pastoralist counties are Narok and IDS-UoN. And what we did is we picked 2 different sublocations in each county. And in each place, we interviewed older men, older women, younger men, and younger women. And what I'm going to do is, well, what I did was I took all the results of these focus groups and I divided it into, if you look at them all, where did you get agreement across all the counties? Where did you get mixed results? So in one county, people might have said one thing, in another county, they may have said something very different. And then I took counties that I thought had exceptions, so that you had maybe across 5 of the counties, people agreed with things, but on one of the counties, people said something different. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll do it fairly quickly. So, overall agreements. We wanted to look at climate change. And one of the things that came out with climate change across all of the counties was there an increase in the incidence and the severity of extreme events. Things now are more unpredictable than they were in the past. I should also say one thing that you also have to be careful of. I know from work done in different places in the United States, there's a phrase that says things were always better in the past. They're called the good old days. And so you have to be careful when people are saying, "Oh, things were better in the past. There was more rain in the past."
there was one grasp in the back. So you just have to be careful when you think about that. Mostly people said the biggest change is there's no drought. But some places, they said, actually, there's too much rain. We're getting floods. And so with climate change, we see that. Another one of the issues that people agree with is corruption. People mention it all the time, almost all the way through when you talk to people about, oh, well, if you go to a hospital, you have to give someone money in order to get any drugs. But the place that people said the most corruption was occurring at the county level. So we were asking at the village level and other things, but the county level came across as more important. Both the county governments are not very effective. And they do things like, well, we have trouble with water, we have trouble with roads, especially feeder roads. People also said they really don't trust the national government. So you've got different levels of government where you have agreement, where this problem, people did not focus on villages. They didn't, there wasn't agreement on corruption at the village level, it was corruption at higher levels. One of the other things that people agree with is that there are problems with young people. This ties to Mondinamo and things like that. But people are saying young people are not employed. And people said one of the things that we really want is to see young people have more employment. They also said, especially with the young guys, that there's problems with drugs, there's problems with alcohol. People also said there's a high cost of living, and that's increasing, and that is causing problems for people. I mentioned the feeder roads and healthcare. So now mixed results. Although people mostly said that the cause of drought is basically climate change. But in a number of places, they said, oh, one of the reasons we're having more drought is that people have cut down the trees. So deforestation comes as one of the causes. And one of the things in another project that I've been doing, people say, well, trees bring the rain. And so when you see deforestation and drought, one of the things that people have said is cutting down the trees. And there's a major push to plant trees to combat that. There are areas of food insecurity. It's tied also to gold. This one is an interesting one. Inheritance patterns for young women. And there are some places where people said, oh yes, we know the Constitution requires that young women and young men are the same. They're equal, they're both supposed to be able to inherit the same. Some places they say, yes, we follow that news. Other places go, well, we don't even know what those rules are. Other places say, well, we know what the rules are, but in our culture, we don't follow those rules. So there's a mix of responses to inheritance by young women. There was a difference in food security. Many places said, well, there's no real problems in security here. In other places, they said, well, yes, there are problems with security. And security also could be the security of the household in terms of crime, theft. Some places say we don't have any problems with that, but other people say, oh, we actually have to sleep with our cows, the other way is going to be stolen. There's also mixed results about trust among generations. in a lot of the places that I have worked, young people say, oh, we can't really listen to the older people. They don't have any idea of what are like. They're living in the past. Other places said, oh, no. In fact, we talked to a woman yesterday that said, oh, our old people are enlightened. Everyone knows that they're enlightened. We trust in those people. And that then comes down to the problems with young people who have caused all these protests. And then lastly, exceptions. Kakamega stood out tremendously for overpopulation. Although you're seeing this result in other places. Other places also saying, I mean, it's in Washington also, where people are saying there's too many people for the amount of land that we have. Lots are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And one of the things that's happening with Kakamega, there's a lot of violence within the family. We have brothers that are attacking other brothers in order to get the inheritance. One of the other said, oh, some of our sons are actually killing the parents. And this was mind-blowing to me. But, and we didn't see it anywhere else. It was just in Kakamega. IDS-UoN stood out for a couple of things. One, primarily Islamic. And people said, we really like the others. John asked a question to focus group of women. Said, what makes you most happy? And people said, I'm most happy to have one. And that was great. Other thing about IDS-UoN, there's a lot of designated housing. One of the things about IDS-UoN is like their networking. And they're primarily pastoral. So you have a lot of ethnic conflict. You've got Senhuru, you've got Iran, you've got Turkana, and there's a lot of it. And it happens across these ethnic groups. And one of the locations within is the Moderator. It also said there's a lot of human wildlife and that there's no one's helping us with this human environmental conflict and wildlife services and there's no like these everything I'm looking at. But you see that you give it, we see in the newspapers. There's an article on Tuesday about what they're calling bandits. But pretty sure bandits is really ethnic conflict. I worked for a long time up in Japan. There was a lot of raiding and it was all ethnic conflict within there. If you read about it in the newspaper, it was bandit. But it was fought against the government and things like that. And although you never a little bit. Iraq stood out also because they also had human wildlife conflict. But there, they said the conservatives help us a lot. They're the ones that try to compensate us to mitigate if a lion kills one of our cows, we can take pictures, we can go to the conservancy and conservancy gives us some funds to compensate for that. So Iraq is different than with Moderator, even though you've got a lot of ethnic, you've got a lot, And finally, that is that stood out was Washington. People said we have very careful plans. We have not water. This morning, one of the friends, someone said, thank you. Acres of days, and I got 80 days. town. And so we started at formal said is very little in certain so it looks the issue so that the development of the soil and non-people and the lack of food security. Sometimes during the dry stage of the market, there's some unintentional, it's not. And that's the my point. What I tried to do was just about this same cross multiples that we did in focus groups. One places had different contributions, same numbers. In which places really were distinguishable because they were different than the other. So thanks to all of you who are here. Thanks to all of you who are online. We have found leaders were fascinating. And one of the other things we've been really appreciative of people's willingness to participate in this. It's been a real pleasure to do work in this project with the local people. We had phenomenal enumerators. We had great leaders, and we had great support from IDS. So we want to thank you so much for all the help, and we want to be able to give back as much as we can. And this is the first time we're presenting the results of our research, and it's still ongoing. Tomorrow we will be going up to Meru to do some more interviews with chiefs and sub-chiefs. So, but at this point, we felt we have enough to present. And one of the things that I know people sensitive to, in many big projects, we hear, oh, these researchers come in, they collect stuff, they go back to the home countries, they never give any feedback to the local to the institutions that are sponsored. And we want to make sure that what we're doing is presenting our results to you. This is way before we even thought about publishing stuff. You know, first people to hear about it. So thank you again so much.
Thank you so much for with us online. I hope you followed keenly. I think we moved through the different times of the presentation, starting with John, who started us with this changing environmental impacts. Without attempting to summarize, I'd like to start by just briefly reflecting on what I heard. Please note that because I work on this topic in pastoral areas, I was very excited to talk to see what the agrarian farming community shared, or where you wanted at a mixed livelihood where there were different options. So some of the comments I have would be linked to the pastoral areas. But then for the participants in the room and those online, please you can start preparing your questions as I reflect just briefly from this exciting ongoing work. And thank you so much for sharing with us like these findings as you also think about the analysis and the next steps. So one of the things that I found very useful for me is this idea of finding out how people experience shocks. These especially environmental types of shocks, but then we think about drought, conflict, diseases. You know, how compounded they become is what we find, especially in pastoral areas, but also the impact of conflict. And this interesting one about environmental change and social outcomes and the role of institutions is particularly very interesting. So one of the few things I had in mind when I had John thinking is this question we asked about how people endorse of taking resources. It's a long-standing question about whether conflicts are related to, the environmental situation, and we know increasingly people are debunking that idea. But it's also good to hear your study also providing more insights. But how did you go about this idea of asking people about the other group resource. I'm asking that because in some areas, like where we work in, the idea of the other group resource is different from what you would call your own private property. So where we have some communal property, I'm sure you thought about it. I think it would be interesting to know for Isiolo, for instance, in the rangelands of Kulamawe, how people think about the other, where people have access to other people's resources through some arrangements, of course, where there are customary arrangements of access. I think Andrew went on to talk about the aspirations of relocations, which is really interesting. The idea of migration and where people would like to relocate to. And this idea of NDVI, I don't know whether you had some time to think about these invasive species and how they also produce some very unequal data in terms of some of the drylands. So you know what I see. Sometimes the data coming out on the NDVI, the vegetation could be less useful vegetation, and I think people have been debating this on this. But very interesting reference to the idea of seasonality, because then even your data would benefit from these seasonal shifts, because then we have the dry season, the wet season. When there's plenty of milk, how do people respond? Or when there was rain, and hope for growing their herds, then in the pastoral areas, or growing their crops for the farmers. Did that change how they thought about their current situation, their food security, or even the future of where they would like to relocate to? The question of who is the population, when we say fewer people reported in the second wave about the interest of relocating, would be interesting one. At least from the other studies, we see more younger people thinking about finding opportunities elsewhere. And I think that is also tied to the food security question. The coal data is very interesting from you, Terrence, and I know you started this work way back. I remember reading one of your pieces from the late 80s on drought recovery in Ghana. So it's really nice to see you sticking with this, but also finding ways of engaging communities in a meaningful way, not a helicopter research where you jump and go and come back next time when you need to hear more. So thanks for that. When we say that there was overall agreement on the extreme events, I find that also very interesting, because the idea of uncertainty is becoming very, like a very big debate in terms of what we can predict and what is definitely uncertain. And I think for the drylands, uncertainty is very critical, even for forecasts, and I'm sure it applies in even other farming communities. So I think more unpredictability here is something that will be interesting for the team to continue pursuing. And the one on corruption, at least for the IDS and Probarometer team to see whether it fits in with the other data they have about how citizens feel about this governance. On the mixed results, I really appreciate the Isiolo aspects of the idea of Islam. And I just wanted to say, maybe there's something interesting here about how people lean on religion, motivate groups around support. So that's the food security, and why they would not migrate, because they have a buffer from their own zakat. This is the religious obligation or for the poor, and how religious systems also buffer these extreme events, and they are not equal. So we don't want to say where there are Muslims, there is more support, but at least there are obligations that we can look at in other places about these other religions and what those forms offer. The human-wildlife conflict is an interesting one. We know there's competition for grazing lands in those areas. There's the carbon discussion where you're interviewing people in Oldoniro, especially. So this could be some other conversations that also speak to your data, but you cannot avoid them maybe as we go along. And I think I'd like to pause here, start with the people in the room. I don't know if you have something to say about some of my reflections, but they were just a way of me thinking how useful your ideas and research is to some of them going on to have here in the room. So maybe we can.
Thank you so much,
Rahma.
Cherry, check the chat on John. Professor Winnie Betula says, thanks for the good presentations. In the first presentation, comes out as if environment as a predictor not matter much. comes out as if the environment as a predictor not much. While in the second, it matters. She may be wrong. It would be useful for the team to say more about those who would like to relocate. What is the demographic and local context? Relocation has been a major policy issue in Kenya, and in most cases, people are very reluctant to relocate. Having more information on those who want to relocate in Kenya may be a good contribution from this study. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe you can pick that as the interesting one.
Sure. One moment, I'm writing down the. Okay. Yeah, I hope everyone online can hear. So, Professor McCabe's question, from what I gather, there were two, or at least two that I can relatively quickly reply to. The first, in the order that I took the notes, is the one about relocation being an important issue, and the more specific question is how or who migrates. So the easy answer to this question, and that is probably not sufficient for everyone's interest, is that we've only really had the proper data to answer this question. And by that, I mean the longitudinal panel data of the same respondents at 2 points in time over a year for a handful of weeks. And so while I and we all will be able to provide a table, a bit like the descriptive statistics that I showed for the demographic and social characteristics of the first wave respondents, for the change in the waves. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. We will be able to answer all those questions about demographics, that is the communities that are the most likely to answer this question affirmatively, or the gender of the respondents who are the most likely to answer this question affirmatively, or the many of those roughly 24 variables I showed. We will be able to do that. I just haven't quite had a chance to do it yet. And I'm repeating myself, apologies. But the reason for that is the best way to answer the question is not just to evaluate the social and demographic characteristics of the people who answered the first wave that they would like to move, which we did. And that's interesting, but it's not the best way. The best way is to find the people who said that their responses, right, have changed in some way. So the people who have said that they are now even more likely than they used to be, right? So I hope that's a relatively clear answer. We're partly there, not quite there yet. As Terry said, as he was closing, none of this has been published yet. The other question, the last question from Prof, was about how in the first section of the communication, a bit of the message was that the environment doesn't matter. I'm generalizing, and that in the portion that I shared, it does matter. And I don't actually think that the two are quite at odds, and I think that this is a matter of clarification, because what emerged in the paper in Nature that Catherine Mock and others, including John, published in 2019, was that there might be a role for these kinds of environmental conditions changing, but that the role is quite uncertain, right? This is the point on the list about medium confidence in this. So if anything, and I may be wording this in a strong way, the IPCC report is saying there's medium confidence in this, and then the Nature paper is saying, well, we think there's probably a role, but we're not too sure about it. That's not exactly the same as saying there's no way that the environment matters. And in what I presented in the second share of the three was that it seems to actually be playing a pretty important role in these cases. So I think we can both be right. That's another way of phrasing this. Yeah, that was the first response to the question about the chat. I have one or two other notes from your comments, Rahma, and they're very, very quick reactions, let's say, if not perfect answers. One of the questions, which is a very good one, about the phrasing of the endorsement experiment making a reference to other communities. we know what you're talking about, but one of the quick responses about this is that we need to balance the survey with 3,000 people, 11 counties, the different types of realities that respondents and households will encounter. So you specifically referred to some of the communities in and outside BCOLA. But this isn't a study just about those communities in and outside BCOLA, right? So when you refer to something like other communities, it has to be generally applicable so that we can make comparisons using the questionnaire across all the communities, right? Again, I think we can all be right about this, right? But that was part of the origin of the way that the question is phrased. It has to be somehow just the right amount of specificity, but also general enough that we can ask the same question in a lot of different places and have it make some kind of sense to people. The question about invasive species is a really good one, and it has to do a bit with how well you can use remote sensing data, which is not an interesting question to ask or to discuss like in a general audience. But there are definitely signals in these data that are green or brown, because that's what NDVI measures, right? That may not be food crops. To identify those food crops is challenging. It requires training sets and validation sets and field work to see which kinds of crops are actually growing. And I think a lot of people here know this, but that's something that we can pursue in the future. But it's something that, well, at least for me, for now, I haven't really had the time to dive into because it's its own can of worms, as the saying goes. And I'll just leave those quick reactions at that. If John or Terry have something to say, I know there's other questions in the chat.
I could answer a couple of things. For, I don't think that Maasai people believe this anymore. But Maasai will say, God gave all the cows in the world to us. So we're not stealing cows when we take them, we're just taking them back. There's other feelings. One of the other surprising things to me, I think, with the institution and devolution, I personally thought institutions can lead to best in conflict. But in fact, I think like it's it's increased it because county government, because it's 5 ethnic groups, they come in for leadership of the county government because the resources you have from the county. And this the other group that has been able to garner most of those resources on the ground. Ones that are at the bottom of the ladder. And so you got it was exacerbated the ethnic conflict because people are trying to say, oh, well, we want the Baha'i vote more than we want the other ethnic group. And so that has increased certain things. And because we didn't do things, part of this work inter-economic, like you mentioned, that sort of say one thing about some of the causes or the present conflict. Inter-economic, the word for stranger and the word for enemy are the same word. And so when you look upon everyone who's not Turkana, in fact, the prefix for people is AGI, me. So Turkana refer to themselves as me Turkana, which is people as a cave, which has to do with basically coming down from the scorpion down. Use the prefix NGI for the other groups. Like the Pecan, we call them Pecan. Pecan call them the super. They don't say these. So you see, even built into their language, they've got this idea that we are people. We defend ourselves with God, and the other groups around us. And basically, and so this, of course, decreases the amount of ethnic conflict. But I've done a lot of work historically and periods where there's quite a lot of peace. But then something happens. And you get a lot of that conflict. I can just say one other thing about unpredictability. There's a strong relationship between the amount of aridity in an area and the unpredictability. So, the more rain the area gets, the more predictable it is. So when you get into the drylands, it's not surprising you hear about unpredictability. But of course, in those kind of places, you also have different species of livestock that deal with this kind of unpredictability. Then sheep are particularly vulnerable to it. Cattle are, goats aren't, camels aren't. And so you've got those kind of differences also with how you adapt to rains and stuff. One of the other things that you asked, how do people cope with things? I think the most common thing is you help each other. I mean, that's one of the things that if you're what happens, you help each other. And we didn't mention it, but there are institutions like the clans. Often the clans will help each other. I mean, members of the clan. If someone is a member of the clan, they lose animals or something happens, the clan will step in to try to help you. So I think those are at least some of the answers.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how we need them.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you. Yes,
Andrew referred to the question about endorsement. What I didn't say is that we actually got a question over 10 years ago, back in 2014, in the national survey in Kenya. We published a paper that showed that the endorsement by the government tended to raise the support for taking whatever measures order. And what's really interesting about that is that the treatment here would work the other way. In other words, if the group, the people in the treatment group get the endorsement here, it's actually lower support for taking everything in the majority than the vote. So it's a huge change from what we saw in 2014. Again, maybe the question you got perfect, but we at least have a consistent question over a long period of time, obviously very different topics. And what's also, again, interesting on that question is that the same difference between the involved people appears in the whole, in other words, the fix the endorsement is having a negative impact on the support for taking education resources in both things. So it's consistent. And I think what we need to probe a bit more is the reasons behind it, the factors behind it, in what areas, among which communities, among which demographic are doing this effect. But I think it's, as I said, you can always change questions. We, could say, oh, we can formulate a better question now, given the very detailed results we have from the area of work. But we want to find very consistent over time. So we prefer consistency.
That's great. That's great. And luckily, you have the qualitative to explain some of the things you would like to do for context-specific sites if they differ. Here we have
Yes. Thank you. I don't know which side to sit because, in a way, I was also part of the team that was doing the focus discussion, but also knowing the level and the depth of this work, it's very insightful and very informative. So from the onset, I want to really congratulate the team on this detailed work. I believe the three presentations do represent three different angles of the study, and because you did not have a chance of reading newspapers or work before then, maybe some of the comments might be far-fetched, and perhaps issues that will come even as you go to the second phase of the project. But nonetheless, allow me to raise 3 issues about the presentations. One is that question in Kenya is very important, both at the level, or whether we're looking at agricultural-rich counties or in the drylands areas, because one, the way the land policy is with a lot of privatization, we've seen a lot of this land distribution or subdivisions that are making most of the arable, or even where pasture is dry, less and less productive. So that in itself, unless controlled, it might affect both productivity and also livelihood. So my question is this something that perhaps will feature in so that we can, as we look at the food security, also to the land policy question? This study was largely based in rural counties, so to speak. It was a purposive sampling or selection of the counties, so most of the urban counties were left out in these studies. And the reason for this was to see whether the outcome of this study in terms of climate change are being felt on the ground, so to speak. So, but even with the focus on rural counties, I think even the more urbanized counties are feeling the pinch. I want to give an example, like here in Nairobi. In the recent past, because of what's happening in the surrounding counties, a lot of land from those counties, surrounding counties, find their way to the city center. I think around March, again in late April, we've reported quite a number of deaths due to flooding, which has created in the presentation some of the issues or environmental issues that are affecting or forcing people to relocate. Actually, statistics put it at about 100 people who lost life. We cannot even think of the properties and livelihoods that were distorted out of that. Why is this? Because if you look at a county like Kiambu, I know it's not in the sample of the study, but what happens is that much of the land in Kiambu is also being converted to horseback. So there's no way even bringing storm water going to percolate down. So the implication is that even though we're looking at the rural counties, then we cannot completely ignore the urban setting. And related to this and the evolution is that we're also seeing a lot of urbanization in these so-called rural counties. And you find also construction happening in very huge levels, even in the so-called rural counties. And therefore, it's a matter of time before they start experiencing the same level of flooding because of interfering with water flow. The other comment I would like to see is on the corruption, and it has featured in all the presentation as one of the issues that one residents or citizens more concerned about. And just related to this, does the data distill between, is it the county, is it the national government, which is more to blame when we look at the data or in general, right? Because the spirit of devolution in Kenya was to try and bring services to closer to the people. And if this is not happening by way of cautionary measures or even support to be able to adjust to better livelihood, then it brings to question the issue of devolution of the intended benefits of devolution. My last question is comment is on the trust in generation, and that really is an important finding. But when I reflect to what has been happening in the country, especially from 2024 with the Gen Z movement, is that there was a feel that the older generations were a bit more tolerant to inefficiency in governance. So then, depending on where the focus group discussions and the survey were conducted, perhaps it's good to tell, does this take maybe when we get the demographic, who are these that are saying perhaps this trust, because the presentation document, trust among generation, but is it maybe the younger generation not trusting the older, or even the vice versa, because there is also feeling from the older generation that the Gen Zs are too vibrant, that they may not even be able to hold on to things and even the livelihood. So how do we again address this issue of trust? Is it a matter of holding forums where each group can explain themselves, or is it just to let us pull to our side and let the time take us to where we go? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Everything you said is accurate. I don't want to count it. I just will say on the last one, in the recent one survey, we had a couple of questions about non-about and what people thought about it. And we haven't analyzed the data in detail, but it's clear that people have kind of two opinions. Some of it are contradictory, but they're not. One is that people, the respondents basically supported the demands behind non-violence, but they didn't support any violence associated with non-violence. That was very consistent in the results. The other thing I would say about urbanization and why the rural campus selection. The background to this is that we're trying to answer that question around environmental impact on social and outcomes for households. But urban areas have, in many cases, lots of options that people in rural areas don't have. So we said the most likely vulnerable households from climate change are the rural areas. So that's why we focused on. And that's why we do as much as we could out of the words from the south. But you're right. Certain areas, like talked about yesterday, but also we heard quite a bit about people on property in the China and leading to Nairobi. So what we thought they're saying, let's say that purely rural area, in fact, is changing even as we do this stuff. But I think in general, focus on rural area is important because again, the whole discussion around climate change and global discussion around that, it's considered that the people in rural areas have health problems, and so we should target
Yeah. Thank you. Also, do we have another set from online as we come to? No, we can take another round. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Please, Dr. Sugar. Good evening. I'm Jalita, and I have a comment and a question. First, I want to confirm to you that I'm currently working on an article, climate change and internationality, using Barometer data online, and the findings show that there's a strong and positive correlation between governance and civilian capacity and perceived climate variability. So we share some insights. And my question, I want to understand how strategy of the commons, especially on shared resources in pastoral community survey. Then two, if you look at the Lewis model of gold economy, the global south, aspiration to migration is closely linked to less productivity of the traditional sector, which is the agriculture sector.
To what extent do you attribute aspiration to migration, climate change in this context? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, a little bit. Those are great questions. Thank you. About mobility having to do with less productivity. We have these questions asking you about how much they're able to produce, and there are versions of asking this question for both farmers and predominantly pastoralists, right? So if we ask, for example, the farmers, I had a question or specifically that said something about how did your sales of whatever the main crop is that you have compared to sales that you have for that crop in the past, right? That's not about the, let's call it kind of physiological productivity of the soil or of the crop, but it is about how that productivity would impact people's livelihoods, right? And so we will be able to see how the answers to that question are related to the responses about the right? So I don't have an answer right now to give you, but we'll be able to see it. This very good question. We'll be able to see how it pans out. We won't be able to know the answer to that question. It's actually a bit related to my notes that I took down from about sorry about privatization leading to subdivisions, making less productive land. Verbatim, basically what you said. Although this question has to do with privatization, a different issue. But we asked, and I was looking through the questionnaire now. It's a bit related to your question, but I was going to, as part of our response to his also good question, point out that we have and have started to use a question that asks, quote, approximately what size of land do you grow crops, right? And if we're able to see not only how that relates to the outcomes, but how the answer to this question changes over time, we might be able to get at some of what you're describing, I think, right? Which is that if people are saying from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, that they are either receiving less revenue from whatever agrarian activity they're engaged in, or that they're growing or trying to grow on less land, right, over a 3-year period, as there was something happening with privatization land seizures, or it had to do with splitting the parcel among children or something. We'll be able to see how that works out. So it's one of those answers that's not a direct satisfactory answer to the question, but it's something that is on our radar that we'll be able to look into in the future. And the description of your work sounds good.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder what the alternative of the how many, what the size of the land will be for the herders, because then maybe you will have something different, and the goals, the incentive data will come. Because here you will not get any numbers of hectares, because these are large grants of land. People are including into other countries. So this is the dynamic, I think, that we can settle through the qualitative, but also maybe people can describe in terms of how far, but we still have to deal with the question of other factors. Yeah.
Obviously, a fantastic question and a fantastic point. I'm smiling a little here for people who are online can't see. I'm smiling because we've been talking about this amongst ourselves. We're related to this because do you remember to a place where there were lots of pastoralists who said they own on private land?
Yeah, there is a.
Yeah, and we're thinking to ourselves, wow, there's a lot of people who say that in the pastoralists and they say that they own a lot of private land. Yeah, the answer to that might be complicated, but the point, I suppose, is that it's something that we have to think a lot about. And we need a lot of insight from other people to answer this, as you said, the qualitative. Because if we just tabulate the results, they didn't make a lot of sense right away.
So the methodology will solve it. Oh, no doubt. Then we should attend the next phase. Basil, do you have another question online?
Not really, not unless we have anyone online who'd like
Yeah.
to maybe
Is
ask
there
a
anyone
question?
online who can unmute and ask? Can pick the last
Yes,
question?
Douglas here. Douglas here.
Okay, Douglas,
Yes,
can you
good.
unmute?
Yes, I am unmuted.
You are fine, we can hear
Can you
you
hear?
very well.
Ah,
Please
yes.
proceed.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just appreciating the session and thanking IDS for ensuring that we're able to get the findings of this survey that we all participated in, and also enjoying the discussion. Maybe perhaps a comment is that Afrobarometer has been very key on the issues to do with trust, and also thinking about how citizens of Kenya trust their local leaders. So it is very interesting to see how we can link that not only to the issues of governance and democracy and human rights, but also how this can also trickle down to the issues of food security. So I think our interest as IDS is also to look at inward and see how we can link those two data points, because I think they are speaking to the same things of what the citizens are aspiring for. And just to appreciate this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. Anyone else online, please? We cannot see, at least from my end. If there's anyone, you can unmute. Yeah? Okay. Anyone. So this is just to thank everyone for participating. One of the other things I just thought about now as we close Andrew, Terrence, and John, is that we've been hearing from people working in this area that people are moving in and out of livelihood strategies, meaning they're shifting livelihood strategies. I know you're asking about the dominant, like the main one, yeah? But there could be room to think about what other options people have, because with all these livelihoods in transition, there must be something happening, especially even in Isiolo. So the big urban setup, there are many people not engaged. Maybe they're engaged in the connections, or these livelihoods are connected. Who has in issue the bread basket, but I'm sure many more people are doing engaging in business and the market value chain. So these are just things to say about how people move in and out based on the circumstances, including the poor who don't have a lot of options. So that's just as a way to share what else we are finding in other parts of the country. I think, Basil, we don't have Linke here, but we'd like to stop here unless, yeah, people would like to thank everyone for joining. Basil, you may have some announcements. And I think this was nice to hear. I think the feeling I have is we'd like to hear more. So please let us know when you have another round and set of this data or interesting findings. And we hope you can also read the details in your publications or in reports in the coming days. Thank you.
Just next time.
Yeah, it takes time. This is the right thing to do when it takes time. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, great conversation. Thank you for joining. Basil, back to you in case you have any announcements.
Not much. Thank you so much, Rahma, for taking us through the session, and thank you so much to our great presenters. And of course, to all of us who are joining in person and online, we can never thank you enough. Thank you again so much. Next week, we have a seminar being hosted by GHA. GHA is the Global Humanities Alliance that brings together 8 international universities, University of Nairobi being one of them, hosted by IDS. The seminar this time that will be taking place on 20th, that will be on a Wednesday. I'll be sharing the link and the post. I've already shared the people online, but I'll share the link before then. So thank you so much. And then to online participants, keep the conversation going. Write to us at director-ids@unbi.sc.ke if you'd like to connect with us and also share any piece of work that you have. Again, we are breaking into a networking session. We are going to invite you to a cup of tea. Please stay online, and thank you so much. Bye. Stay online and enjoy the program. Thank you. Participants, we have a cup of tea, waiting, and then we to do a very quick group photo. We have our new photographer, Cassandra, ready to take that shot. So thank you so much, and let the conversation continue. Thank you. Bye, online participants.
Bye.
Can turn your video on and say hello.
Let's see Belongo.
Malongo, Abraham. Hello, like to see you, Sarah, the same. Thank you, Douglas, for showing your face.
I don't want to work as much, but
Thank you, Prof. Anyone say hello, bye to all of us. Yeah, please unmute. Unmute yourselves.
Thank you.
I'm going to do a photo online, so please turn on your cameras. Yeah. Thank you for turning on your camera, Francis. Okay.
And so
I'm taking a quick photo. Done with the first one. You both have been in the photo. Please turn on your camera. There's your photo. Anna say. And come out. Turn your cameras. Thank you so much. We have to have Dambala. Thank you. And now the last one, John Martin. We're having you if I can't see your face. So, okay, I'm done. Thank you so much. Good evening. Good afternoon. Bye bye.